Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
Send your Spirit, God, to open our hearts and our minds to your word and strengthen us to live according to your will, in Jesus' name.
Amen.
I'm Gary Hall, and I used to work here. I now live and work in Washington, D.C., and I must say I'm really enjoying living in a place where the culture is so much like that of Hollywood. Some of you may remember me from the years I was on the staff, I'm sorry to say, a steadily decreasing percentage of you. But you may recall that I started off my adult life wanting to be a comedy writer. It won't surprise you then when I say that to me, today's gospel, the Good Samaritan story, has always had something of the structure of a joke. You know, one of those a priest, a minister, and a rabbi go into a bar kind of jokes. Except that in this one, it's the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. You know, a priest, a Levite, and Samaritan are playing golf. A priest, a Levite, and a Samaritan are in a boat. A priest and a Levite and a Samaritan are shooting pool. You get the idea. When I was in seminary in the 1970s, the idea of seeing Jesus as a stand-up comedian was in vogue among New Testament scholars for about 15 minutes or so. And even though I loved Jesus and comedy greatly, I was never really attracted to this idea of Jesus as a kind of first-century Henny Youngman, you know. But I must admit that some of the sayings of Jesus would make a lot more sense if they were accompanied by a rim shot, you know, if he had a drummer following him. Just as comedy gives us a new perspective on life by throwing us off base, so Jesus' parables often work the same way. You think you understand what God is up to? Well, listen to this story. So, listen to this story. A Levite, and that is, a Levite, that is a person who is trained in the interpretation of scriptures. A Levite, a priest, that is a person who is professionally presides at holy rituals. And a Samaritan, that is a foreigner, a person not much higher than a leper in Israel's social structure. These three are walking down a road. They see a man who has been beaten up and robbed, who's lying in the middle of that road. The priest crosses to the other side of the street and keeps going. The Levite does the same. The Samaritan stops. The Samaritan attends to the wounds, takes the man to an inn, and then provides for his lodging until he will recover. Now, what makes this story sound like a joke somewhat on its own terms is that the outsider does the right thing. When confronted with an actual suffering person, the two religious professionals act as if they've never even heard of the Bible. It's only the outsider, the Samaritan, a person with the wrong social pedigree and the wrong religious ideas. It's only the Samaritan who acts like a Christian person. Jesus' closing question, he asks, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? That closing question has made generations of preachers and generations of commentators talk about this story as if it's essentially about the choices made by the three people walking on the road. But I don't think Jesus wants us to think about those three passers-by. I think he wants us to think about the man lying helpless in the road. Now, like the priest and like the Levite, most of us don't want to regard that person in the road for very long. We will do anything to make this parable and to take this parable and make it about an ethical dilemma so that we won't have to contemplate what it means to be sick and near dead, lying helpless. Preachers love to talk about the three passers-by, and we love to identify with those men because we want to all think of ourselves as people in control, as men and women with choices. But our being in control, our having choices, is always at best a temporary condition. When you're an infant or when you're a child, you are not in control. When you are aged or sick or disabled or incapacitated, you don't have a lot of choices. When you are oppressed, when you are depressed, when you are lost and alone, you don't feel like you have many options. None of us wants to think of ourselves that way for very long. We want to live our lives confident that we will always be in the driver's seat. So when we hear this story about a man lying helpless in the road, our thoughts immediately turn to the people who can do something. And they turn away from the one who is totally dependent on the kindness of strangers. But if we're listening to Jesus attentively, if we think about this story more the way a patron in a comedy club would than the way a pew sitter in a church would, we might just get that the story really is about the one person in it who cannot do anything at all to help himself. He's a man beaten up, a man left for dead, a man lying in the road. After all, the story begins, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. As uncomfortable as that person makes us, this person is the main character in this story. So we should think, if only for a nervous minute or two, we should think about him. So, just who is this person? I have two thoughts about who he might be and about how things might really be for him. Thought one is that the person lying in the road is really you and me. Now, I don't like to think of myself this way, as one lying dead in the middle of the road. I'm sorry, I have just messed up my manuscript here. Talk among yourselves for a few minutes. I knew this would happen to me someday, and it's happened to me now. You know, the funny thing is, right before we were coming in, I was talking to Susan, and I kept my coffee cup and threw my sermon away, which showed that I had certain weird feelings about this manuscript to begin with. I don't like to think of myself like the man lying in the road. Doing so certainly does not flatter my best image of myself. Hey, I'm a cathedral dean. I have advanced degrees. What do you mean when you say that I'm like the guy lying in the road? How can Jesus be comparing me to a helpless person? Couldn't that guy at least be a man with a PhD lying helpless in the middle of the road? So the first truth is that despite our many illusions about ourselves, all of us are vulnerable. All of us are fragile creatures. No matter how affluent, no matter how accomplished, no matter how healthy, how comfortable we might be, each of us is potentially that person lying in the road. An illness, the loss of a job, the loss of a relationship, the death of a loved one, taking the wrong side in an argument. Any of these events can land us in what my friend, the writer Nora Gallagher, who has had her own health challenges and has written about it in her new book. A place that Nora calls Oz. A place you enter when you get sick or lost. A zone where you realize that you were up against it, and that priests and Levites of this world really don't want to have very much to do with you now. Most of us get through life keeping the idea of our vulnerability at bay, and because we cannot entertain the thoughts of our own potential disability, we don't very much want to have anything to do with people who remind us that we too might end up in a wheelchair, or in chemotherapy, or in prison, or on the street. Therefore, thought one is that in directing our attention to the man lying in the road, Jesus is asking us to see ourselves as we are, fragile, vulnerable creatures who are always just one step away from losing it all. We have come to think of health and freedom and agency as our basic conditions. But Jesus knew better. Even at the height of his popularity as a healer and a teacher, he knew that Calvary was just around the corner. It was partly that knowledge that made him open to the suffering of the outsiders, of the sick, of the bereaved, of the lost. Only when you acknowledge your own vulnerability can you respond to it authentically in other people. So that's thought one, and here's thought two. Just as the one lying in the road is vulnerable, so also is that person loved. If our individualism prevents us from seeing our fragility, so does it also keep us from grasping our real worth. In the culture of late capitalism, which all of us jointly inhabit, you only have value commensurate with your purchasing power. One reason why so many Americans are so insecure is that at bottom we think our worth is a function of our relative affluence. Even though most ignore the one lying near dead, there still is the one who sees and cares and acts. As dire as his situation may be, the one in the road is not alone. His value has nothing to do with his net worth. There is someone in the story who is with him and for him. In this tale, that one is the Good Samaritan, a parabolic stand-in for God. Do you want to know what we are like? Look to the one lying in the road. Do you want to know what God is like? Look to the Good Samaritan. Like all of his parables, the story of the Good Samaritan is Jesus' way of showing us our real situation in the universe. We are both worse and better off than we think. This story asks that you see yourself as you really are, that you love yourself as you really are. You have real value. There is someone who knows and loves and values you beyond any human frame of reference. Realize that in your fragility and in your vulnerability, you are like everybody else, and they have real value too. Reach out in compassion and forgiveness and humility, and you will meet the one whose love and justice and grace sustain the universe. You do not have to be healthy or powerful or successful to be loved. There is someone who knows and loves you as you are. That one loves you always, even and maybe especially when you are lonely and broken and lost. There is someone who is ready to see you, to pick you up, to help you on to the next stage of love and life. That one is here and available now in this community and among us as we gather at this table. That one loves you. That one loves me. That one loves us all. That is the gospel truth. And I'm here to tell you this morning that it is no joke. Amen.